Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Relationship and Truth, and today I'm going to be taking back up the topic of splitting the union. I've already done a couple of videos on this topic, and to rehash those in very brief terms, the first video I talked about the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. That is, we're in a nation in which there are a lot of different groups, roughly divisible into two, but there's a lot of subgroups as well, that don't happen to agree with each other. And the historical reality is that when you have groups inside of a nation that don't agree with each other and very strongly don't agree with each other, there's only three outcomes. The first is slaughter. One group decides to eliminate the other group, or groups as the case may be. The second option is subjugation. That is, one group is expelled from the marketplace of ideas, expelled from high positions, expelled from being able to do certain kinds of business. They are made to serve the other class and relegated to the outskirts of respectable society. And then the final option is secession. The groups break away from each other. Those are basically the only options that have ever presented themselves historically. And it should be fairly obvious that the first option, slaughter, is not preferable, hopefully for fairly obvious reasons. And also the second option, subjugation, likewise, for fairly obvious reasons, should not be the preferred option, which leaves us with secession. And there are problems associated with secession, but given that they don't involve killing anyone or debasing them as fellow human beings, it would seem to be that those problems are preferable to the alternatives, that being slaughter or subjugation. So secession is preferable, and in the second video I talked about some objections that people have to secession. First off, people always talk about drawing the map. Well, no matter how you drop the map, there's always going to be people that get stuck on the wrong side of the line. I talked about solutions to that problem. Basically, you have a waiting period, you have programs in place, and you help people move. If they don't want to be with you and you don't want them, it makes sense to help them move to the other side of the line. Another objection that people raised is the whole issue of the national debt. Who gets it? Well, it's not necessarily fair in that those people would not necessarily have been the ones that were in favor of that debt, but the most simple way to do it would be to divide it on population. So say America gets split into 5 different groups, and whatever the population of those respective groups would be, after you get a rough head count, that's how you divide out the debt. Is it fair? No, it isn't. Because like I said, there'd be a lot of people that were not in favor of a lot of the debt that we accumulated that would be stuck with far more debt than would be proportional to the debt that they were in favor of. But it is a compromise that everyone can at least live with. And then last but not least, a lot of people object to just the very idea of secession. Oh, that won't work because we tried that back in the Civil War and that ended badly. Well, I pointed out in that video that the Civil War is really not a great example. That's a case when the Union, rather than the Confederacy, acted as a bully and said, no, you're going to come back with me no matter what. It was a case of basically an abusive husband who had to go and get his woman back. Not exactly our proudest moment in American history of forcing somebody back into a relationship with you that doesn't want to be in a relationship with you. Not a great thing. So that shouldn't be used as an example, first of all. And on top of that, there have been several successionary movements in the past century. Two fairly ready examples is the secession of India from the UK. And also, from within the United States, we had a successful successionary movement here in the recent past as well. Didn't get a whole lot of news, but it nonetheless happened. And that was the secession of the territory that was the Philippines. It used to be a U.S. territory, is now an independent nation. Did you know that it happened? Did you think that it was terribly awful of them to split off from us? Did you think that they were absolutely horrible people for not wanting to do what we wanted them to do? And did we think that they were terrible for wanting to be their own nation? No, we didn't. It was a very successful and a very peaceful transition from one nation into two. Successful secessionary movements can happen. They tend to be more successful when the groups are geologically isolated from each other, but the main commitment that is necessary, even though the geological difference is definitely an aid, but the main commitment that is necessary is a commitment to peaceful resolution of conflict. If we agree that our differences are insurmountable, and we are committed to finding a peaceful solution to them, then secession is going to be the net result of that, and it will be successful in so much as the parties are committed to both maintaining what makes them them, their individual distinctives, and to peacefully resolving their issues with the other side. That's all that's necessary. In this video, I'm going to transition a little bit to some things that I would suggest for the conservative group or groups that would break away from the United States if this were to happen. Three things in particular. First, I would say that any of the conservative groups need to give a lot of thought to becoming a nation of jurors. I'll explain that in more detail. They also need to give a lot of consideration to the idea of doing politics by lottery rather than by party votes. I'll explain that as well. And then last but not least, we need to recognize that what is the public domain needs to be expanded in terms of what we think is of the public domain. There's been a lot of companies that have actually done a lot to inhibit public discourse, fair, open, and honest public discourse, in the name of calling certain things private that we all know well and full are really the public marketplace of ideas in the modern age. All right, so those are the three things that we're going to talk about this time. The necessity of jurors in a jury system and jury nullification, the necessity of a lottery system for political office, and then last but not least, a redefinition of the public domain. All right, so going back to the issue of juries. One of the biggest problems that we have right now in America as it exists in this moment is that our politicians have a lot of power. And a lot of times the final determination as to what is considered right or wrong in the nation is left up to a judge. Whether that judge be on the Supreme Court or one of the circuit courts or even a local traffic court or a family court, judges have a lot of power, and they are political appointees who have political agendas. And the fact that basically what they say goes at the end of the day should absolutely terrify you, because these are unelected people with very definite agendas that do not represent the common man, because they're basically lifetime appointments as they are right now. Now, as the nation was originally founded and conceived, there was an idea that was in place that the American citizen would be able to appeal to a jury of his peers, and that jury would have the power of what is called jury nullification. I believe, who was it? The first Supreme Court justice, was that John Jay? I can't remember the specific name at the moment. I apologize. Sometimes I get on camera and my mind goes blank. But in any case, the first Supreme Court Chief Justice spoke heavily in favor of the concept of jury nullification. And that is when a jury is convened to hear a case, and the jury hearing this case basically says that this shouldn't even be an issue. Their interest goes from deciding whether or not the person is guilty or not guilty according to law, but instead becomes whether or not this law is even valid. As it was originally conceived, the jury not only had the power to say whether someone broke the law or did not break the law, but the jury also had the power to nullify the law, to say, we don't care if this person is guilty or not. We think this is a bad law. We think the law itself is invalid. That was actually how the system was originally understood to go into place. In the modern age, though, that has been removed in two major ways. First of all, people are not told about the possibility of jury nullification. technically you can't stop it, because what jury nullification ultimately is a jury deciding that we are going to acquit this person, and we're not going to do it on the basis of the law. We're just going to do it because we don't happen to think that what this person did was wrong in our eyes, even if it is wrong in the eyes of the law. Technically, you can't stop people from deciding, we're not going to convict this person. Instead, we're going to vote to acquit this person because we think your law is a dumb law. Technically, you can't stop people from doing that because they can give it any reason they want to. But whatever the reasons are going to be whatever the reasons are. You can't technically stop them from doing that. But a lot of times in courtroom settings, the jury is told, you need to decide on the basis of the law whether the person is guilty or not. And that's what you're held to. You're not held to a standard of common sense or whether or not you think the law is valid. And in fact, a lot of times they're specifically told not to think that way. That wasn't how the framers of the Constitution originally envisioned it, though. And the reason why our original Chief Justice was in favor of jury nullification was because we understood our laws to be of the people, for the people, by the people, and that also meant correctable by the people as an end result. So the legislature decides on some stupid law, and judges and law enforcement, so on and so forth, decide to implement these stupid laws, and then it finally comes down to a case where someone is brought up on charges according to this law, and his friends and neighbors, his peers, are looking at him going, we don't have a problem with this. This isn't actually bad. Why is this a court case? Nullified. That's government by the people. That's the whole reason why we had the jury system to begin with, is so that political appointees and politicians wouldn't be the ones with ultimate control. So we need to bring that back. And the way that we need to bring it back is by writing it explicitly into law. Like I said, implicitly it's already there. You cannot technically take that away from people. People can choose to acquit someone, and they can give any reason they want to, but the real reason in their head might be, well, this was a dumb law, therefore I'm going to acquit them. Technically, you can't get rid of it, but what you can do is enshrine it. You can write it into the law itself, into the new Constitution, as it were, that jury nullification is a thing. And you can even have a specific number of times at which point a law has to be repealed. Let's say it gets brought up in the courts 4 more times. It gets brought up 4 more times in the course of, since its implementation, the law is officially nullified on the national scale. This has come up multiple times. People multiple times said the law itself is invalid. Either it needs to be taken back and reworked so that it does become valid to the average person, or you just need to drop the stupid thing altogether. That's not a bad idea. And then the other side of it would be to make every charge, every legal proceeding, not just charges, not just criminal charges, but every legal proceeding needs to be something that can be appealed to at least to some kind of a jury. Including, say, traffic tickets. Okay, I disagree with the judge. I want to go before a jury. And it might be a fairly small jury. It might be as simple as grabbing a few people off the street and say, hey, will you guys hear this guy's traffic claims and decide if he's okay or not. It might be as simple as that. It might be just, a jury of 4 or 3 or 6 or something like that, random guys from the street, and bring them into the court and say, here are some of your peers. Do you agree to let them decide your case? Yes or no? And then it's decided right then and there. And that way the judge doesn't have the ultimate power. You can start with the judge to kind of weed out some things and not make juries necessary for everything. But the individual who is being compromised in any way, having his rights taken away, his privileges taken away because he's either a criminal or he's involved in some kind of litigation, etc., whatever the case happens to be, whoever the defendant is, or claimant, whatever you want to call him, needs to be able to appeal to a jury. If you enshrine that into law, and you also enshrine into law the principle of nullification, you get a lot farther in keeping the politicians and the political appointees at bay, because it becomes down to the individual man. Can I convince my peers truly of what my case is, and can I get them to agree that this was a dumb law, or that this is how the law actually should be applied, even though the activist judge is trying to do something else? That helps a lot. Enshrine jury nullification and make sure that everything is appealable to a jury. And this also would apply to, say, family court. In family court right now, we have a very heavy bias towards the mother. Fathers usually do not win family court suits very often at all in terms of full or majority custody. I think it's like only 20% of the time that the father winds up getting full or majority custody, which is pretty sucky. That doesn't strike anyone looking at it as being particularly fair. And there are some cultural and societal reasons why that tendency would tend to exist. Our culture, unfortunately, tends to celebrate, not actively, but in the way that we work things out, we tend to encourage fathers to be deadbeats. We really do. Our culture is a deadbeat father culture, unfortunately. So some of that is to be expected, but there's still a very heavy bias. And if we introduce a jury into that system, at the very least, you could say that your peers really did decide your case. So first of all, we need to become a nation of jurors. Everything that gets brought up before any legal group needs to be something that can be appealed to a jury. And that jury needs to have before them enshrined into law the principle of jury nullification. Yes, the legislature put forward this law that got passed. Yes, the courts have been upholding it. Yes, the executive branch has been bringing people in on these charges. But you as the juror are the final fourth branch of government. You are the people that gets to say at the end of all of this whether or not the law itself is even valid, and if the executive branch and the judicial branch, and of course implicitly the legislative branch, actually are doing things correctly. You have the right to nullify all of those as the individual who has to deal with how that law is actually being implemented in your town, in your county or state, whatever we happen to call the new boundaries. That would be a very, very, very good thing. All right, and then, like I said, after that, we're going to talk about the necessity of doing political offices by lottery. Right now we have a system of voting, and after recent events, there's a lot of us on the conservative side that are not overly we don't have a whole lot of faith in the voting system anymore. Voting tends to be a very messy thing in general, in that you have the formation of political parties and all the caucuses and all these things, and all of the gerrymandering and all of the just politics in general is a very, very, very tiring thing. And there's so much subversion and all these kinds of things that happen in it, and it's just utterly nasty business. If we went to a lottery system, though, in which everybody who had, say, a valid ID or a driver's license was put into the lottery, and then their numbers would be randomly selected for political duty as a part of the legislature or whatever, then you get rid of a lot of those political party things and whatnot, because you're not voting for anyone anymore. And all these wonderful political ads that we have every 2 to 4 years, all of a sudden they go bye-bye. And you're not worried about political party affiliations and voting according to party line and all that. Instead, you just have random everyday people going and doing their duty, basically like the jury pool. The jury pool is usually formed that way, in that you have a group of qualified individuals, usually as denoted by having some kind of valid ID or driver's license, and that pool of qualified individuals you randomly select from to get people that you ask to do a task for a limited period of time. I personally would suggest 2-year terms with a 50% stagger between the different political groups. So basically you would have 50% that has been there for at least a year, and then the other 50% is completely brand new. They learn what they're doing for a year. The old ones step aside, and then the ones that have now been there for the new year train another group that is going, train another group for a year, and you have a 2-year total term, 1 year where you're new, 1 year where you're teaching the new guys what to do, and you have very, very, very short terms so that it's not a great burden on your life as a whole. And yes, that would be your job, and you would be compensated like we compensate people that we poll for jury duty. We give them a per diem, and the same thing would apply to these political offices. If you're going to be a legislator for a couple of years, we'll give you a couple of years' salary, and I would propose making it based on the median income of the nation. That way, if the nation is doing well, they do well. And it probably should be given a little bit more because they're going to have traveling expenses and you're going to have to put their life on hold and whatnot. So it might be, 50% higher than the median income or something like that. But always based on the median income so that they benefit from making sure that their nation continues to do well and make sure that that gets reevaluated every year, which is often to do a sampling of median income, and it would only need to be a sampling. It doesn't have to be a census. But every year evaluate what the median income is, and that's a percentage more because you want to take into account the things that you're doing to them that are going to be an inconvenience. But a percentage of median income evaluated every year so that they have impetus to make sure that everybody in the nation is doing well. And make it a fixed percentage relative to the median income that cannot be changed except by a vote of the people themselves, not the legislature, of the people. And like I said, they're randomly selected. All the political party-ness that goes on in the caucuses and all that, it all goes bye-bye. Now, of course, you will need to put measures in place to ensure that the lottery selection process really is random, and there needs to be a process in place so that if anybody challenges it, it can be investigated, so on and so forth. But if you stick to that principle of random selection of ordinary people, you get rid of a lot of the things that go on in politics right now, where the guy with the best smile is the one that gets voted on because he looks good, or the one who promises a chicken in every pot doesn't get the vote because that's stupid. You actually have regular, ordinary, everyday people who had an ordinary, everyday life going in to deal with situations that are going to affect ordinary, everyday people. And I would also suggest that during their term as legislature, that they are basically sequestered. There will not be any lobbyist or whatnot. They will have access to a computer and a single email address, and everything that goes to that email address will be able to be monitored by their constituents, and their constituents just being people from their own home state, not people who voted on them, obviously, because they're selected by lottery. But they will be sequestered, and they'll only have access through one primary portal, and everything that they do will be a matter of public record. There's not going to be any lobbyists visiting them. There's not going to be any under-the-table deals, anything like that. They will essentially be in a prison because we do not trust them at all. And they need to know that. And the consequences for violating their sequester, the terms of their sequester, and therefore violating the public trust, need to be severe, on par with treason. All right, so first we need to become a nation of jurors again. We need to enshrine jury nullification, and we need to make sure that everything in the legal sphere is appealable to a jury of one's peers. In the case of a traffic crime, it might be a fairly small jury, like 4 to 6 people. In the cases of family court, maybe 6 to 12. Criminal, of course, 12. Something on the federal level that's beyond ordinary crimes, you may need to have represented based on however many regions you have in the nation as a whole, so on and so forth. And could be more for that purpose. But whatever the case is, everything needs to be appealable to a jury, and everything needs to be nullifiable by that jury. Then, like I said, lottery system. Get away with the caucuses, get away with the political, get away from the political parties. Have very short terms, like I said, 2 years, 50% stagger. half is just coming on, half has been there for 1 year and can help the other half out. That's as much leverage as we're going to give them. Sequester them, give them very limited access to the outside world, to lobbyists, those kinds of things, and make sure that they're actually on task doing what they're doing and that they're really serving the people instead of basically doing their own thing like our politicians do now. And then finally, last but not least, we need to redefine public space. A good rule of thumb to at least start with, it might not end here, but at least to start with would be to say that if 25% or more of people use a particular service or avenue or whatever, that good service, whatever is being used by 25% or more of the people, needs to be considered public space with protections that you would expect in a public space for, like, speech. Talking specifically about First Amendment rights there, or what would be the new First Amendment rights. That's, say we have a new version of Facebook in these new conservative states, if it ever happens, which I really hope it does. So say we have a new conservative version of Facebook, and let's say 28% of the people use it because it's not very popular. Well, that's still over 25%. That's still more than a quarter of the people. And that would be considered a protected public space now. Yes, the company that set it up might be a private company, but because they have so many people using it, they have to respect the fact that this is now an avenue in which people are communicating with each other in a general way. It has become the new or the modern form of the public marketplace of ideas, and because of that, they have to give certain extra freedoms that private companies normally would not have to do. Now, if they keep it fairly small and it's a very small number of people that use it, well, it's not really public space anymore, and you give them certain levity for having a private company. But like I said, once you pass a certain threshold, and I think 25% is a good one, but that can be debated, but once you pass a certain threshold, you're talking about providing some kind of a good or service that allows you basically to control a quarter of the population or more. And if you can control what a quarter of the population or more gets to see in the first place by sequestering ideas you don't like, well, that results in some very significant problems that we're already seeing with modern platforms like YouTube and Facebook and all these groups. If we enshrine into law that if you are being used by a quarter or more of the population, that you no longer get to hide behind the private moniker anymore, that helps prevent a lot of those problems. All right, so to recap, for these new states that would form, especially the ones that would be on the conservative side, I would ask them to strongly consider enshrining the idea of the American as juror. He has the power of jury nullification, and he also has the power to appeal any legal proceeding to a jury to make sure that the judge doesn't get carried away in his activism. We can still have lifetime judges for all we care, because at the end of the day, they're not the ones that get to make the final decision. You, as the new American, the new conservative American, get to appeal to your peers, no matter the circumstances, and they are the highest appeal in the land. Not the Supreme Court, not the Circuit Court, your peers. And once they've made a decision, then the American people have spoken, because that's actually them. They're not political appointees, they're not politicians, they're your peers. That is the fourth branch of government. Next, like I said, lottery. Get rid of the stupid political party system where the guy with the big smile or the one who's making all the grandiose promises is the one who gets the vote because people are dumb and stupid. No. Randomly select from a pool of generally qualified individuals, like I said, as simple as having a driver's license or photo ID. Randomly pull from that group of people, sequester them, give them very short terms, like I said, 2 years, 50% stagger, to do their job, and you get rid of all of this stuff that goes, well, not all of it, but the vast majority of it you get rid of. And then finally, last but certainly not least, redefine public space as any good or service that is being provided to 25% or more of the population, which becomes public space in which protections have to be guaranteed to individuals based on that public status. Those are my thoughts, and I really hope the ball does get rolling on this, and I don't want it to be for lack of effort on our part to get this started. Okay, I'm not one of those people that's hoping for war. I'm not one of those people that's hoping to subjugate the other group either. I want a peaceable resolution, and I want real results that actually give us what each group, conservative and not, is really hoping for in the nation. Thank you very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.